tell them it's time for you to elevate your living. God has called us to a greater place and a greater dimension. And this is a season where we determine we will make the sacrifice. Look at your neighbor, tell them make a sacrifice. See, we live in a day where people want stuff to be comfortable. If it's not consistent with my schedule, then I can't do it. Boo, that ain't a sacrifice. A sacrifice is when you change your schedule. I can't. A sacrifice is when you change your schedule. A sacrifice is when you reprioritize. A sacrifice is when you say, all right, I know this is typically my family time, but this is a season where I need to bless somebody else. Take the whole family and go and bless somebody. We sometimes become so rigid in our structure and in our systems and schedules until there is no flexibility. And you are trying to figure out why your struggle is your struggle. Can God get you to be in it more flexible so that he can bless you? Perhaps the way he wants to bless you is in the direction of your failure to be flexible. Look at your neighbor, tell him, relax, boo. God's trying to get something to your life. But God tells David, he says, listen here, you've got to build this threshing floor, and that threshing floor represents an area where grain is beaten out. You've got to build the altar on the threshing floor. That means this is a hard ground. Every time your life gets hard, you're trying to figure out what's the reason for this trial that I'm going through. It represents a hard place, and threshing floors represented hard places. But that's the greatest place to build an altar. That's where you learn to bend your knees. That's when you learn to turn your plate over. That's when you learn to get real quiet. That's when you learn to retreat inwardly so that you can just talk to God and God talk back to you so he can tell you about yourself. I found out why we don't like to talk to God, because God likes to tell us about who we really are. He exposes us to the truth of us, but we don't like to see us. We like for people to placate us. We like for people to patronize and pacify us. We like for people to just butter us up and tell us that we're wonderful. Well, what about when somebody walk to you and say, you crazy as a bed bug and a sharp fox with a tail on fire? You just slap crazy. We get offended and leave the church. You better be glad somebody took the time to tell you the truth. You need to go home and investigate. Am I as crazy as they say? Because 10 people have told me the same thing. Look at your neighbor, tell them all of them not lying, boo. Somebody is telling you the truth. And so God gives the instruction. You are going to build the altar, but you're going to build it in a hard place. You're going to build it on a ground that has been prepared. In essence, the oxen have walked on this ground and they have made it real hard. It's got to be hard because when you throw the wheat down there and the oxen are treading over it and you've got these big stones that are rolling over it, there's got to be something resisting the weight of the stone or the weight of the oxen's feet in order to get the kernels out of the chaff. There needs to be some degree of resistance, and we get frustrated when there's resistance. I learned a little resistance is good because you ain't going to achieve nothing in the gym without a little resistance. Look at your neighbor, tell him you don't need much. All you need is a little bit and a greater number of reps, and you will burn it just as you did any other way. Here it is. David has got to build this altar, and he's got to build it on the threshing floor. That threshing floor represents a place of separation. I told you on last week that we are in the Hebrew year 5777, and the prophetic implication or perspective is this represents the season of the ruling of the sword of the one who is the crown king. And that sword represents for us a season of separation. That means back in October of 2016 up until September of 2017, there will be separations that you will just open your eyes to and say, what? Look at somebody near you and tell them you can't get frustrated this season over who leaves, because this is the season when Lot left. I can't hear nobody talking to me.